at and you've heard every possible factoid. Everyone's told you how great their work is. We actually want to hear from you. We want to have a dialogue together. So our panelists are not going to do big presentations. In some cases, they're friends of ours who we just said, hey, could you just come offer your perspective? So they're kind of resource participants with benefits here for this dialogue. But please know that Kevin is going to be roving around later with a mic because we're really serious about wanting to hear from you. So think about your questions and also know that we want to hear your stories. We know that, for example, our Friends of the Arbor Day Foundation and others have success stories to tell in this work. And we want to hear your success stories too, not just the folks who are up at the front here today. So I want to set the frame a little bit before I introduce this wonderful woman behind me, who is Brenda Mallory, who is the chair of the White House Council on Environmental Quality. Makes her one of the single most important people in the federal government on anything to do with the environment. And Chair Mallory has been particularly notable in that she has brought climate justice to the fore of how the United States leads on environmental issues and on climate issues like we've never seen in the history, really, of the federal government in the United States. And so she's going to offer some perspectives, and we'll capstone the introduction here with her thoughts and remarks. But I want to set the stage for a moment and just talk about what do we mean by tree equity in cities, this nature-based solutions for cities. And there's a searing reality that we have in the United States and around the world, and it's this, that a map of trees in virtually any city is like a map of income and a map of race. And we actually proved this. Our organization created a tool that right now is only covers the United States, but we're in the process of expanding it internationally, as I'll speak about later, that actually mapped this neighborhood by neighborhood in the United States, because we knew that this was an issue. We were seeing it one city at a time or one neighborhood at a time. And so we realized we're missing the snow for the snowflakes. We actually have to show the pattern here, the systemic pattern, that lower income neighborhoods and neighborhoods with the majority people of color have less tree canopy. And in fact, our tree equity score showed that on average nationally in the United States, the lowest income neighborhoods have 41% less tree cover than the wealthiest neighborhoods. Neighborhoods with the majority of people of color, regardless of income, have 33% less tree cover on average. And that is the result of systemic racism. That's practices like redlining and other practices and patterns of bias and disinvestment that have led to less investment in planting and caring for trees in those neighborhoods. That's sort of thing number one to understand. This is a fundamental reality. Tree inequity is the reality that we have today. And we believe that we need to have tree equity in our cities. Well, why is that so important? Because it's going to take some work to get tree equity in our cities. And there are a lot of reasons why. There's one I want to just tease, and then I want to let Kurt Schickman talk a lot more about it in a bit, which is extreme heat. Extreme heat is the greatest public health threat from climate change, and it's not even close. Today in America, extreme heat kills more than 12,000 people per year. And it happens predominantly in lower income neighborhoods and communities of color that are hotter and also face higher levels of pollution, and where people often have less underlying defenses against extreme heat, where they might not have air conditioning in their homes, where they might have pre-existing health conditions. And so our tree inequities are magnifying an incredible climate injustice that are rising extreme heat across the country is disproportionately killing lower income people and people in communities of color. And tree equity can be a meaningful part of addressing that issue. Now, there are a number of other public health considerations as well. I mean, there's a very, very strong role that trees play in improving air quality. There's actually even a very strong role that they play in improving mental health, and so many other things that I could talk about. Well, tree equity is also important from an economic perspective. For example, we have research from the U.S. Forest Service showing that on average in the United States, having trees in our communities reduces energy use for heating and cooling by 7.2% and saves homeowners over $7 billion. But you don't get that benefit if you don't have trees in your community. So again, we're magnifying economic inequities with tree inequities. And of course, as you can imagine, there's a climate change issue there as well, that extra energy that we're using because we don't have trees in these neighborhoods is obviously also contributing to the underlying climate crisis. So there's a lot at stake for our communities in getting to tree equity. And the good news is, before I turn it over to Chair Mallory to talk a little bit about what the U.S. government is doing on this issue, is that creating tree equity is also an opportunity. And it's particularly an economic opportunity. Our organization did a study that showed that we can create 25.7 direct, indirect, and induced jobs for every $1 million that we invest in planting and caring for trees in our cities. Think about 25.7 jobs per $1 million that we invest. And when we do that the right way, we can create jobs for people in these neighborhoods that are in many cases most fundamentally economically underserved and disadvantaged. We can actually address economic challenges in the process of addressing environmental challenges and climate injustice. And that starts to be something that you can see all these benefits wrapped together, and you can understand why suddenly we have momentum. There's a tree equity movement that is building in the United States and increasingly around the world to do something about this, to address this crisis, but to also turn that into an opportunity. And so part of that is the incredible investment that the federal government has made in the Inflation Reduction Act and also somewhat in the infrastructure bill. And with that said, I'll let Chair Mallory talk a little bit more about how the federal government is leading this tree equity movement. Sorry about that. Oh my gosh. Whoa. Sorry about that. Hello? Help? Sorry, we're having a little technical difficulties. I'll tell you what, while Kevin is solving for that, I won't even give a spoiler alert. I'm going to let Chair Mallory talk about these massive, amazing federal investments that we have in tree equity. In the meantime, I want to get the conversation started with our panelists. You all set?
There we go, sir.
Now, you don't come to COPs for the precise production values.
From afar. Thank you for inviting me to join you all, even from afar. The theme of this event, Urban Trees for Equitable Cities, is one that resonates with me and the work we are doing in the Biden-Harris administration. In particular, it reflects a key pillar in the President's signature conservation policy, the America the Beautiful initiative. That pillar centers around a simple but sacred idea. Everyone should have access to green and blue spaces. President Biden and Vice President Harris are laser focused on making sure everyone in this country has access to clean air, clean water, and healthy communities, which means access to nature and green and blue spaces. Forests can and will play a key role in providing access, and urban trees are critical to increasing climate resilience in our communities. We know the benefits nature can provide for our physical health and our mental health, but too many communities in the United States lack accessible parks, rivers, and green space. In fact, 100 million people in the United States of America lack access to nature and green space in their communities. And we know this disproportionately impacts low-income communities and Black and brown communities. We are talking about communities without access to tree cover, parks and forests, bike paths, and river trails. Without this access, community members are less likely to be physically active and more likely to suffer stress and mental fatigue. That's why in August, the Biden-Harris administration announced an investment of over $12 billion to create more green infrastructure and safe outdoor opportunities in nature-deprived communities. With urban forests making up 20% of all forests in the United States, we know that we must tap urban trees to help bridge the access gap and better protect communities from the impacts of climate change. We look forward to other global leaders stepping up to invest in urban forests and working in partnership with communities to ensure everyone has access to the benefits of nature in their community. Thank you again for inviting me to join you, and I wish you all productive, enriching sessions over the next 2 weeks.
Fantastic. Thank
Hello,
you.
everyone.
Yep.
Thank you for inviting me.
So good, we were going to do it twice. Incredible leadership, I just want to say again, from the Biden-Harris administration. And if for those of you who haven't been tracking in the U.S. or perhaps folks who are here from other countries, this is part of a broader initiative called the Justice 40 Initiative, which is really thinking about environmental justice and climate justice from every dimension. But nature-based solutions have been a really leading way in which the Biden-Harris administration and Congress have sought to lead with nature-based solutions in the United States. So I'm going to say a couple of things specifically, maybe just draw out a little more detail in Chair Mallory's remarks. Do another couple quick announcements of kind of new opportunities, and then I want to get to hearing from our special guests and all of you. So the first thing to pull out of what she said is within that $12 billion that she talked about, which is for a really broad diversity of nature-based investments in nature-deprived communities, there is $1.5 billion for creating equitable tree cover in our cities, very specifically for grants to cities and frontline organizations to do this work of tree equity all across America. That is, by our estimation, the largest investment ever in urban tree cover by any national government. It's a really incredible opportunity for all of us to go out and to do this work of tree equity. And I think that substantial allocation of funding at a time when the overall package that was in the climate package that was in the Inflation Reduction Act was going down is a real testament to the fact that Congress and the administration were very well aware of both the urgency of this work, but also the fact that there's a community of people and organizations out there across America that are desperate to see this investment in their communities and ready to partner with governments to get that work done. So $1.5 billion that will run through the U.S. Forest Service, and we think it's a real example of what governmental investment can look like. And by the way, we're going to use mostly U.S. examples here today, but we will get into some global examples, particularly from Kurt and some of the work of the Arshrock Foundation internationally. And so for those of you who are international participants, we're going to be very interested to hear how does this relate to how you're seeing this same work internationally. Two other quick announcements. I'm really proud that American Forests, my organization, announced a couple of days ago here at COP a new $10 million Tree Equity Catalyst Fund that is specifically designed to help lower resourced communities, less affluent communities, and frontline organizations that might not have a lot of paid staff, maybe they don't even have any paid staff, to get the capacity to be able to apply for and use those $1.5 billion. Because we don't just need tree equity, we need equitable distribution of funding to get the work done, to make sure it reaches all the cities that need this investment, make sure that frontline organizations can play a funded leading role in getting this work done. And so we're going to target those dollars to make sure that everybody gets to have a seat at the table in figuring out how this is going to get done, and then ultimately pull resources back to their communities. And then lastly, in terms of the international connection, this actually grew out of COP26. We had a number of folks who approached us from other countries when they learned about our tree equity score in the United States. And if anyone wants to multitask, it's treeequityscore.org. And you can look up your city if you're from the U.S., or if you're an international participant, you can look up a U.S. city and just kind of see what this tool looks like. But it's, so you can actually see how this data tells the story of tree equity and also becomes a tool to help guide us in applying the work on the ground. But based on interest that was generated out of the presentations that we did at COP26, we're now in the process. You're getting a pre-announcement. We're going to launch this formally next week. We're creating a tree equity score for the UK. And that's the first country internationally, but we're expecting to relatively quickly expand it to other countries. So if there's interest from folks here about bringing it to your country or an individual city in your country, we'd be really interested to learn about that. So amazing new public funding from the federal government. We hope that our funds can help unlock the power of that, and then True Equity Score is a tool we want to offer to help get this movement going internationally as well. Okay, so let me turn to our participants, and Curtis, okay, I'd love to start with you, because as I said, I think heat is really the leading edge. There are so many reasons to do this, but the incredible risk of heat, it feels like the leading rationale for it. And the Arsh Rockefeller Center, Resilience Center, and your leadership on extreme heat has been unparalleled, I think, anywhere in the world. And so I'd love you to just share with folks, am I just making this thing up? I mean, our heat leaders around the country and around the world who are trying to figure out how to protect their communities, are they seeing trees as a top-tier solution? And how is that playing out in the cities you're working with all around the world?
Great. Well, thanks very much, Jed. And hi, everybody. I'm Kurt Schickman. I'm with the Arsh Rockefeller Resilience Center. Can you hear me now? And I run their heat program there. And so, Jed, you're absolutely right. Actually, I would say that not only are trees and nature-based solutions in the mix when people are talking about heat, they're really in the forefront. And in fact, oftentimes what we're trying to do is bring in complementary passive cooling measures to work with the nature-based solution. So absolutely, that's where it is. And I think it's for a variety of reasons. One, as you say, there's many additional benefits beyond the cooling benefits that cities are looking to get around stormwater management, health, and so on, air pollution mitigation, things like that. So it's one of those multi-benefit type investments. And so the cities know that, and they're investing accordingly. Yesterday, we launched a blended finance facility called the Cool Capital Stack. And with that, what we've done is paired a series of different types of investors and financiers and risk transfer groups with actual projects. And overwhelmingly, those projects are around tree planting, nature-based solutions, and not just new parks, but really strategic and thoughtful placement of new tree infrastructure, new nature-based solutions within cities, so that people aren't just going from one to the other, but are really able to link those up together, so that where they're walking outside, where they're existing outside, they're linked together. So Monterrey, Mexico, for example, are looking at renovating and adding 30 new parks within a greenway that will be linked across different across the city, really replacing a city that has lost a tremendous amount of natural space. Santiago de Chile is another one. They've had great uptake from the national government. We're seeing opportunities to expand that even further. So absolutely, it's been one of those issues where it's really a matter of driving finance into the space, and the solutions, the plans are there to implement it. So,
is there an easy to remember website for people who want to check out the Cool Capital Stack? Is it a way for people to find that?
Yeah, sure. So you can go to our website. We're 1billionresilient.org. All letters. Yeah.
Fantastic. So let me give you one more prompt, because I hope we have some participants from Africa in the room. Did I see Mariaki Sawyer here from Freetown?
You did, yeah. She was actually just in the last event.
Freetown, the Tree Town, they call it, right?
Exactly.
She's been doing some amazing stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think Mariaki Sawyer has led the way in really corralling and organizing international funding to not just come in and talk about trees, but to really plant trees. So she's going to be planting close to 1 million trees in Freetown, which is a city that has lost a tremendous amount of tree cover. And she's doing that not just wherever they can, but really targeting thoughtfully neighborhoods that are especially affected by flooding, by mudslides, and reintroducing these trees into those places. And there are plenty of examples like this in Guadalajara, Mexico. They're doing a tree program that is based around where they have busy on hot roads and sports facilities, so that where people are outside or where there are already negative heat outcomes and air pollution outcomes, they're trying to negate those or at least cancel those with tree planting. And they're doing that not just with planting trees that work today, but really working with and growing the nurseries and nursery community to plant the trees that are native, but also to identify the trees that will be that will thrive in the climate that Guadalajara is soon facing. And we've seen similar work in Itaquini in South Africa. So this is really not something that's just an American thing, and it's really coming from the grassroots. And so really now, like I said, the issue is not finding the solutions or being innovative around the solutions. It's being innovative around the financing to get out of the way and get people doing what they want to do and what they know how to do.
Amazing. Well, thanks for your leadership, for the Arch Rockefeller Foundation. We're a partner in something called the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance that's been led by Arch Rockefeller, and just an amazing, really an early leader on this issue of extreme heat, which now, thanks in part to your efforts, feels like it's at the top of the docket for everyone. So Sean, if I could come to you, because Kurt's final comments there were kind of a nice segue to how does this connect to outdoor recreation, to the issue that Chair Mallory spoke about in terms of nature-deprived communities, and how do you see tree equity kind of connecting to some of those agendas?
So the data that you presented on tree equity and how communities that are lower income and communities of color tend to have less tree cover actually plays out in protected areas and parks and green space all around the world. We have a statistic that we call the nature gap, which is that communities of color are 3 times more likely to live somewhere that is, quote, nature deprived than white communities. And similar disparities exist between high and low income communities, as well as, interestingly, families with children in the US are also more likely to live somewhere that is nature deprived. So this data on street trees just compounds how we are lacking a living, interconnected ecosystem in these underserved, disinvested, overburdened communities. So it's very tightly connected to environmental justice, because these are the same communities facing disproportionate burdens of pollution, who have less resilience to the climate crisis because they have less trees to lower the extreme heat and less ways to absorb floodwaters and high winds. So this is one large interconnected issue that is in fact the same crisis we face as the loss of biodiversity around the world. And of course it all feeds into the climate crisis and the environmental justice crisis.
Thank you so much. And by the way, I apologize, I did not introduce Sean is with the Hispanic Access Foundation, has been a great partner of ours in a number of ways, including through U.S. Nature for Climate, one of the other collaborations here. So how about this, Nadia and Mohammed, I'd love to bring you in, and I want to let you take this whatever direction you want. They were very kind. Nadia and Mohammed are with Earth Uprising. If you don't know Earth Uprising, you should. First of all, by the way, can we have a hand for youth? I mean, right? Let's have a hand for youth. We are where we are because of youth. Let's get this straight. I mean, youth saved the climate movement. The climate movement was dying. It was going down hard. Youth saved this movement. That's a fact. And Earth Uprising, his organization, was sparked by Alexandria Villaseñor, who is, you might know as Alexandria V, an incredible youth activist, who as a teenager first, came onto the world stage to help educate people on these issues, and then built an organization. It's hard enough to lead an organization when you've been doing this for a few decades like me, right? And now working with innovators like Nadia and Mohammed, Earth Uprising is creating a network of youth who are leading on climate action and, really importantly, climate justice all around the world. And so I'm wondering if as a prompt to you, I won't let you take this whatever direction you want, but how does what we're talking about here today relate to how youth are thinking about climate change and climate action and justice? But I particularly just appreciate that youth have made sure that the justice part of this didn't get lost and how we think about climate change. So I'd just love for you to talk about, however you'd like to, how does this connect for youth?
Okay, so first of all, hello, I'm Mohammed Ahmadi. I'm a 19-year-old Iranian climate activist, currently based in the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, so in that area. And I'm the co-founder and Global Youth Leadership Director of Earth Uprising, and also the co-founder and Communications Director of the MENA Youth Network. And I first want to begin talking about the importance of nature and forests for youth. So last semester I took a class in university called Children in Nature, and we looked at many studies that show how nature and experiences in nature, especially forests, are vital for the mental development and brain development of youth, and their physical and mental health. And children who don't have those experiences in nature are put at disadvantage for the remaining portion of their lives. And connecting to that is how we looked at studies that show that immersive experiences in nature, also including in forests, is more closely, it's more strongly correlated to adult pro-environmental behavior than environmental education as children. So from the perspective of youth, we really want to prioritize, having having equitable access to nature in all communities. And as Mr. Daly and our other speakers mentioned, the low-income communities are the ones who have the least tree cover. Their schools don't even have playgrounds. They don't have trees. Their communities, they're deprived of that. And we want to make sure, that that's fixed. And with all these initiatives that the U.S. government is working on, you are working on, we think those are amazing, and we would like to partner. And also we have one of our members, Kevin Mintai. He's working on some tree planting initiatives in Kenya. And we know of other groups in Africa and other places that are working to plant trees. And so that's from the perspective of us and youth.
Thank you so much. So this is very exciting. Nadia and I figured out that we're from the same town.
Yes.
So it's very exciting to me. We're both in Alexandria, Virginia. And so please talk about what does this mean to you, and how does this connect to your perspective on this work?
Well, so hi everyone. I'm Nadia Khalif. I'm 19 years old as well, and I'm a part of the Global Youth Council for Earth Uprising. And how this connects to my experience is that I come from a low-income community. I grew up low-income, and so I understand the struggles of being low-income. And although being low-income in Virginia might be very different than being low-income in another state, I understand that we don't have the same level of protection as other communities. And so, that being the case, that has shaped my experience as a climate activist. That has inspired me to always fight for marginalized communities, specifically for Somalia and low-income communities.
Thank you so much. That is fantastic, and very excited to work together when we get home too. Great. So I want to bring in now Leah. But actually, before I transition, I just want to mention something very important. So Mohammed mentioned Kevin Patel. Kevin Patel is a tremendous. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Well, so I wanted to actually give a shout out to Kevin Patel, who is a tremendous youth activist based in Los Angeles, and is also working with activists around the U.S. and around the world. And Kevin is a stakeholder on a member of the Stakeholder Council for that coalition I talked about, the U.S. chapter of 1T.org. So we're really proud that Kevin has been a great representative of youth perspectives in the leadership of this really important coalition. And then Sophia Kiani just joined us newly as a member of that council as well, and you might have seen her on social media. She's been doing some great work here, in fact, addressed the General Assembly of the UNFCCC yesterday or the day before, and she's also a member of that Stakeholder Council. So youth are really in the leadership in a very institutionalized way in this work. Oh, great. So I want to turn to Leah Laramie, who's with the state of Hawaii, and has been a great partner for a number of years, going through the work of the U.S. Climate Alliance, a group of states that have committed to leading on climate change even during a time when the United States was pulling back. And Hawaii, I always said, was kind of like the star pupil in the class. They came to some collaborations that we put together to plan nature-based solutions and take things that nonprofits had, tools and resources that nonprofit had, and provide them to states that were trying to figure this work out. And Hawaii just kind of zoomed ahead, including making a 100 million tree pledge, ultimately to the U.S. Chapter of 1T.org. So we have a number of states that have made a pledge to this goal, this trillion tree goal, and Hawaii has a particularly interesting pledge, which includes tree equity. And so, Leah, I'd love you just to speak about kind of how did Hawaii get to making that part of it's a big number, 100 million trees, so how did it also make sure that urban trees were part of that? And then also, what's the role of a government that's not a city government? We'll probably all figure that out, but if you're the state government or the federal government, how you think about helping build capacity in lots of cities and towns simultaneously to do this work?
Yeah, thanks, Jad. So urban forestry was always a part of our pledge, from the get-go. We have a great urban forestry program, and the real key for that program is connecting to the community organizations that are really on the ground, connected to the communities, and taking the actions. Oftentimes we get caught up in the bureaucracy of state and even county governments on getting trees in the ground, so it's really these community grassroots organizations that are jumping on board. So it's really our responsibility in order to get, this amazing federal funding that's coming down, and making sure that we're enabling these community groups to be able to access it and actually implement it, because we often get stuck in these conversations of the planning and the logistics and what can we do, where these community activists could just get trees in the ground, the right tree in the right place, and really know what that means for their community. So our 100 million tree pledge from the very start looked at how do we incorporate urban trees to that, and created a tree canopy viewer, which is very similar to the tree equity platform that you folks have. And we really wanted to understand where there was underinvested communities, where we needed to invest more, and are also looking around schools and how we need to make sure the same ideas for the pathways for getting safe routes to schools and reducing heat, to make sure that we're investing in those areas as well and understanding how to make those connections.
Thanks. And can I ask a follow-up question on that? So I talked about the fact, the really painful reality that our tree inequities track not just by income. People can usually get that one, but the fact that race and ethnicity is also part of it. And I'd love to know, as you did that analysis, how did that play among Native Hawaiian populations? Was there a correlation with Native Hawaiian populations and where you saw the tree inequities?
Yeah, for those of you who are not familiar with Hawaii, we have a really, really interesting mix. We call it, a mixed plate of people within the state. So, we have a minority majority within the state, and Native Hawaiians are unfortunately a minority within the state. And we, it was really interesting to see how that played out, because it wasn't a super direct correlation there. And we didn't see even the direct correlation with BIPOC communities, and I think that's because we have such a diverse community within the state that it just didn't play out in that same way that it does.
That makes sense. Yeah, exactly, because of that sort of in the income strata and that type of thing. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Okay, well, so now get ready, because I'm about to put you to work here, and I'm going to run around like Phil Donahue. I'm dating myself, but he was like somebody who'd sprint into the crowd with the microphone, stick in somebody's face. So I'm going to stick this microphone in somebody's face. If you don't raise your hand, I'm going to make you talk. So be ready. But I want to throw out a couple of questions, and I'm going to let the panelists here take a crack at them if they want first, and then I'm going to turn to all of you. And the first question I want to ask is about how we work with communities on this, because we can't do this to communities. We can't just do this in communities. Kind of show up landing like a spacecraft in these places and suddenly popping out a bunch of trees. It has to be done deeply ingrained with communities. And I think, Kurt, some of your comments started to get at examples of how people are really thinking very carefully about that. And so I'd just love to ask the group, are there particular critical success factors that you've seen in terms of how people go about, as these kinds of initiatives start, engaging with communities the right way and creating the right roles and setting the right tables so that everyone comes to this work equitably and how they can participate in it? Any thoughts on that from any of the panelists?
So I can kick this off by sharing some of the factors that can make street trees and any kind of nature equitable or not, because it's more than just having that green space or that tree there. There's also the way that the decision was made to plant it, and who was involved, and who was maybe shut out of it, and who actually got the funding to do this and who didn't. And we also see areas like parks where entrances are shut off on the boundary that faces a community of color, but the entrance is very easy accessible. There are walking paths near the white community on the other side, or parks that are blocked off by a multi-lane highway and are inaccessible to the historically black community on their other side. These are all real life examples coming from my city in Baltimore. So there's a lot of factors that come into play, and it's a very layered web of socioeconomic issues, but the heart of it is that communities know what is best for themselves, but you have to be proactive to actually go out to them and pay them for their time is a really important issue among these communities. So I'll just start there.
No, thank you so much. The really helpful perspective. Yeah, did you want to jump in on this? Or Kurt, did you want to share one of those examples that you kind of alluded to?
Well, I guess I would say that to me, it's how the question is asked. The question that we ask, especially, I don't know if you guys notice this, but I'm a middle-aged white guy doing this work. And so, when we go into a community, it's often a community that I'm not from, where I don't have the history there. And the question to me is not, how does heat affect you and what do we do about it? Or how do trees help you? It's what's going on in this community. I want to hear from you. And then then we can start to think about how heat impacts that. So let me give you a quick example here.
Yeah.
I did a little work in Newark, New Jersey, and the entry point and that's a city that has done quite a lot on trying to bring heat mitigation and heat adaptation to the city. They did it not because it's hot in Newark, of course it is. It was actually because they were noticing that on hot days, more children were going to hospitals because of asthma.
Yeah.
And that was really what was driving local communities, what was driving what local communities were concerned about. And so it's really not, to me, it's not so much going in and saying, I have heat solutions. It's hearing what the challenges are and working around that. So when that's done, and we have chief heat officers in cities around the world, and that's how they approach it, I think that's a much more effective way that we've seen to engage communities and hear from them and not try to simply put our message into and fit it to their problems, but more to hear from them and how we can sort of support that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and Mohammed, Nadia, it feels like I've heard a lot from youth about youth having a seat at the table, and just this idea that it feels like increasingly youth don't just have to knock on the door to try to get in, but people are trying to think, where should youth be at the table from the beginning? And I know if you've had any particular success stories of kind of getting your place in the conversation, or any thoughts about the right way and the right timing to incorporate youth in efforts like this.
Okay, so what I was thinking is that in these low-income communities that don't have trees, that we're kind of trying to get trees there. These are communities that have high rates of crime, have high dropout rates, drug use rates, all of that. And I think by creating a program where youth can get employed to help create these parks, or plant these trees, or create these natural areas. That's a way to combat all these societal harm issues, and also get environmental benefits, help the youth and help the communities and overall. So I think creating jobs, creating like a climate conservation corps or something like that.
Yeah.
I know that it's proposed like for Biden to do that or something. I don't remember specifically. So I think that's a very, very good way to get youth involved, and that not just that helps. All things, society, economy, environments, everything. I think that's going to be the good plan. So yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, we had American Forest has a partnership with Tazo Tea, supporting Tazo Tree Corps in cities around the United States, and exactly as you're saying, supporting positions, entry-level positions for young people, particularly from disadvantaged populations, to get into these career opportunities that we're creating with this investment in tree equity, and it has just the kind of effect that you were describing. And now, did you have a thought on this one?
Yeah, so to add on, I'm a part of the Global Youth Council, and one of our campaigns is to set up bilateral meetings with politicians and change makers, and I've had some success on that. I've met a few Somali parliament members, the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Environment, and so I've had conversations with them about Somalia and about terrorism there, and I've had conversation with them about environmental issues, and so while talking to them, they've given me hope and inspiration to keep on fighting for climate justice, specifically for marginalized communities.
I wanted to add another very important factor when it comes to decision making around street trees, which is trust between communities and decision makers, because there have been instances where street trees were not wanted by the community, which was very surprising for me to hear for the first time. But it makes sense when you hear that it happens pretty frequently that an outside organization or a funder or a government will come into a community and say, here, this is what you need, and then they do it, and then they leave the community with the consequences. So the community was left without trees being maintained if they were left, to grow in ways that became unsafe, or crossed with power lines, or destroyed the sidewalks and made an issue for wheelchair users, for example. So there has to be a commitment to follow-up, to maintenance, and to repairing broken trust between communities and the organizations and decision makers that have historically caused those kinds of problems.
Yeah, that's a critically important point. I want to capstone this part of the discussion with a story, a really hopeful story in this regard, but I want to now, I'm going to fulfill this promise, turn to the audience. Anybody have a story you want to share about either your thought of things we have to get right in the way we engage with communities in this work, or a success story that you want to share of where, hey, we worked on this and here's how it went?
Hi everyone, my name is Kat. I am currently a master's student at the University of Michigan, and I'm also sitting on the board of a nonprofit in Detroit called Arboretum Detroit. If you didn't know, a lot of neighborhoods in Detroit are almost completely empty. There are vacant lots of land all over the city. And in this neighborhood of Pole Town, my organization, before I got there, I cannot claim any of this. I'm just proud to be a part of them. But they realized that there was a lack of trees. And what they ended up doing is they started creating an arboretum within Pole Town. Pole Town was one of the hardest hit communities in Detroit. Actually, in the 1980s, the mayor sold part of the land and raised 1,500 buildings to make way for a General Motors plant that basically destroyed the entire community. But now it's only about 3 years old, but we've planted trees all over. We have 3 different plots of land, and we're continuing to expand. We're working with multiple partners, as well as even bringing in people in the community to do volunteering. And our arboretum has a little nursery where we give trees out to our community members as well. So we're not only helping plant within the land that we own we call them Tree-troit. That's the name of our areas. But we're also allowing people to become tree stewards in the neighborhood. So it's truly an amazing organization that I stumbled upon and now I'm a part of. So I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. That was fantastic. Does anybody else want to jump in on this? Yeah, please.
Hi, sorry, hiding at the back. My name's Bethan. I'm the Senior Policy Specialist for the Zoological Society of London, and we do a lot of work on nature-based solutions, and we recently wrote a report on rewilding in urban spaces, which is why I'm here. But I wanted to share a little bit about some thinking we've been doing on when we're thinking about introducing or reintroducing or bringing nature into all spaces, but specifically urban spaces. We need to not be under the illusion that we can build these spaces as they looked in the past, or how we imagine they should have looked based on sort of historical precedent around how green spaces should look. Because we're living in a climate change world where ecologies are changing, and these plants and these ecosystems are gonna survive in a different way. So we need to be building with the understanding that we need to build for resilience for the communities that live in these spaces, but also for the species that we're planting as well. And there's some really interesting science around the opportunities for what we can do with these rewilding initiatives, and also just the vital need for green spaces in urban spaces for the mitigation of climate impacts and the building of resilience for already vulnerable communities. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that intervention, and hopefully the UK True Equity Score will be something that will be helpful to your efforts. Well, you got into some really important issues there, and I want to work backwards. That issue of climate-informed urban forestry, right? It's not like, you've got forestry, we're real serious out there, and then we just stick trees in the ground in cities. We have to take urban forestry, the details of that, the scientific details of that, very seriously at this moment in time. The stress on urban trees in some ways is greater than it is out in natural forest ecosystems, and so there are a lot of exciting things happening in the United States on leaning into climate-informed guidance for urban forestry. In fact, we published a guidebook with the Forest Service on that topic, and there are a lot of other neat things happening as well. So it'd be fun to compare notes. And I know, Kurt, you mentioned some of the efforts, and I believe it was Mexico, where people, again, are really focused on those kinds of details. So for my money, we need more dialogue at COP where we're actually getting into these kinds of technical details together, because we need to learn from each other. These are complicated issues, and so we need to accelerate, I think, the collaboration process and the learning process on those kinds of details. I also wanted to circle back to your story about Detroit. This is not a plant, I promise. I actually was going to reference Detroit as part of getting to Shauna's point that the right thing done the wrong way is actually the wrong thing. And there was a study, and I'm not sure if this is the one you were referring to, but it was actually in Detroit in 2014. And there was a great researcher named Christine Carmichael, and she did a study to figure out why were some of their tree planting and tree giveaway programs not successful in every neighborhood. They were successful in some, but there were some places where they weren't. And what they really figured out was that they had done it sort of to neighborhoods instead of with neighborhoods. And so what's really exciting about Detroit is it's gone from this sort of poster child for how maybe not to do it to now, actually I was in Detroit just a few weeks ago with the Greening of Detroit, which is another really wonderful community-based organization there in Detroit with their workforce program that employs formerly incarcerated persons to move into careers in urban forestry. And with everyone all the way up to the mayor and even Senator Debbie Stabenow from Michigan was there, all on board. And you know, members from the community just coming in and saying, this is great, I want more of this in my neighborhood. So I think it's all about approach. It's all about, again, building a table where everyone has a seat right from the beginning, as opposed to kind of gets invited for dessert but isn't there from the opening course. And I think that to me is very hopeful that we can get those kinds of details right. But Sean, did you want to come back in and say more on that? Okay. So what I want to do is actually close with this issue of workforce and this idea that this is a job creation opportunity. And that we made a decision to American Forest that we're not going to talk about tree equity and without talking about the economic inequity in these neighborhoods. That's the most fundamental issue. Let's get real about that. That is the underlying driver of health inequities and all other sorts of inequities in these neighborhoods. So shame on us if we are ramping up $1.5 billion of investment and we're not turning that into jobs for the people in those neighborhoods. It's a must. It's not a nice to have. It is a must. And so, you know, we have been involved in building career pathways programs that are working on exactly that kind of approach. I'd love to hear from the panelists and all of you your thoughts, experiences, and best success stories, and how do we make sure that we are engaging the people who need these career opportunities, giving them those stepping stones into these jobs that we're creating, and really turn this into economic uplift at the same time as environmental and climate justice. So any thoughts from any of you on that? And I'll Greg, yeah.
Okay. Hispanic Access Foundation has a program called the Mono Project, which places young, talented Latino professionals in government conservation agencies. And it's such a cool program because it creates this pipeline from youth to folks with their careers more mature. And we create this kind of snowball of inspiration, of actually showing in what has traditionally and continuing until now been a very overwhelmingly white workforce, that people of color can succeed and build their careers, and we can show them off and create this cohort of people who have each other to turn to, and to just create that kind of unity and that space where previously they may have felt like they didn't belong because they didn't see anybody who looked like them before. So it's definitely possible, and we just need to create that space and create that pipeline.
Just to add on, I resonate with what she said, and being that I'm a Global Youth Council member, I've had the opportunity to travel to New York City, to Pennsylvania, to Egypt, to speak about youth engagement, and this wouldn't have been possible for me without Earth Uprising. I come from a low-income community, and so opportunities like this are very, very scarce and hard to find. And so by joining the council, I've been able to network with many people. I've been able to meet Somali parliament members and just be in a space where I can grow and become more inspired.
Thank you. Leah, do you have any experiences you want to share on this, or Kurt?
Yeah, one of the issues that we're really coming up against in Hawaii is the pay scales at which these opportunities are at. And, you know, these are jobs usually with the counties or with the state, and, you know, we lack the capacity because we don't have the training in order to get people into positions such as arborists. So we really have a limited number of arborists, and there's just not a huge enthusiasm for folks to get into that line of work because it just doesn't pay well. So it's just really something that we really need to be better addressing and looking at that, you know, at the county and state levels of how do we make these, you know, living wage jobs, because often, you know, and this is, I think, an issue across the nation and around the world, that these positions are undervalued and we just don't pay them well enough. So it's something that we're looking at and trying to address, and both getting the training opportunities so people have the skill set so they can get into the jobs, as well as making sure that these positions pay, you know, a good wage.
That's wonderful. And any great stories from your work, Kurt, on this?
Yeah, I guess I would quickly add that in South Africa, for example, in eThekwini, otherwise known as Durban, there was a program to train unemployed youth and the people in their 20s to raise trees in the sort of 5-gallon buckets and then plant them. And then the idea was they would get a bounty for the trees they took in, and then an additional bounty for keeping those trees alive at a certain aspect. Nice. And so what they found was in the communities where this was where this program was operating, those trees not only were healthier, but they were more accepted by the community because it felt like a community tree. And so it created a continuous job. What we saw was it wasn't just you take a few trees. What ended up happening is you'd have someone grab 50, 60, 70 trees, and it created little micro economies around this. And so and that also helped those trees actually live longer and actually make it through those sort of dangerous first couple of years. And if you'll just indulge me, I wanted to comment on something that you brought up, and that is that I should have mentioned earlier, which is, when we're talking about with communities engaging, especially on nature-based solutions, where the ultimate hope is that we make these neighborhoods more valuable, that is also a threat. It's in many ways. And so I think it's very important that we be conscious of that and pair our efforts in this space with anti-gentrification and other measures that will help assuage that, or at least help counteract some of that concern that we're not making the neighborhood better for them, we're making it better for the next neighbor or the next person to move in. And I think that's a really important aspect of the work, at least as we see it.
That's a super point. Thank you so much for bringing that back in. Okay, did you had something you want to share?
Hi again, my name is Peter Bulimo. I come from Kenya with the African Youth Caravan to COP27. I just wanted to share a little story that also resonates with what you have said. I think from where I come from, environmental discourse and especially involvement of youth has for the longest time been very exclusionary and extractive in nature. I'll give a story of myself. I started environmental work in first year in campus. That was around 2016. This is the first time that I've come to COP, and this is also the second time that I'm getting a major opportunity. And I've been working in the space for all that time. And in most of the work that we do, the only thing you're told is you'll be given opportunity to network and to see people. And throughout this period, you have the economic burden, that you have to handle. And all other, the people that depend on you. If you come from Africa, you understand that the dependency ratio is so high. And if you come with ideas, no one is willing to listen to you. For example, I'll just give a good example of myself and a few colleagues of ours. We've had 3 brilliant ideas throughout the period. The first idea was on integrated management of Cuscuta doda. If anyone has heard of Cuscuta doda, is an ornamental invasive species that aligns itself as a flower, but it's actually a pest. And by the time you come to realize, it has matured and it finishes all the other plants that exist in the compound. And so we wrote proposals and went to various organizations. But because you're young, people think you don't have an idea, and people think this is a waste of time and resources. Another good idea we had was on a project called Takamali. And we realized the problem of waste management and the way, waste collectors don't have the capacity, to engage on socioeconomic activities, even when there is a lot of opportunity in waste collection. And we wanted to educate these people on financial literacy and how they can manage their resources, the resources they get out of waste collection, create jobs, sustain their families and livelihoods. Again, we visited a number of organizations and no one really, wanted to listen to us. I was so lucky to get a sponsorship to a program in Yale University called the Tropical Forest Landscape for Sustainable Management and Use. And there we are also developing a multifaceted project. It touches on circular economy and ecosystem restoration. And I'm so happy to see that folks here are working on nature-based solutions, because that is also an area that we are working on, and we are using strategies such as the Miyawaki way, assisted regeneration, natural regeneration, and trying to help communities restore their landscape. Of course, understanding and appreciating their community heterogeneity, and that they are an integral part of nature. On the other hand, because this project is happening along the lake region, we are trying to harness water hyacinths. If you've heard of Lake Victoria, you understand that there is a very significant water hyacinths problem. And, convert it to biofuels, and provide an alternative form of energy. And that, as a social enterprise, the funds that we get now channel back to the restoration program and empower communities, just be facilitators, and let communities, handle the restoration based on their own ideas, understanding of restoration. But you look at all these ideas, and that's just, a pinch in the ocean of the many ideas that young people, have. But there is really not a place that you'll go and someone, to hold your hand. And, more significantly, in the recent times, we continue to appreciate the need of intergenerational dialogue and consensus. While starting this activism, we were really working in silos and saying, you are the bad guys, we want this, we are very radical. But more in recent times, we continue to appreciate that, yes, we need a dialogue, we need to understand, we need you guys as our mentors, as our inspiration, and to hold our hands and, share skills and ideas on how best we can implement our projects. But I continue to find it very difficult. Yes, there is progress, but it's coming at a very low pace, because I've been attending side events around here, and I hear so much money being thrown out, being placed out here. I've been listening to people with very great ideas, but I keep asking myself, what is the position of young people, meaningfully engaged? Yeah, in the long term, not coming to me and then you tell me, I'll fund your project for 1 year. For me, for example, I don't look at planting trees, I look at nurturing trees. In the next 5 years, will I be able to see the progress of the tree that, I planted when I was in first year? But if I come today and, be very happy, I've got some little money, I go to a place, throw there 1,000 trees, I've not even done research to understand if this tree, perhaps is the right tree for this place, and, things like that, other background information.
I apologize because Shauna's session starts at 4, and I need to be respectful of her. She's actually up next. Thank you for what you said, and I want to actually capstone, that was beautiful. And I want to capstone actually with one final thought, and I'd love to keep the conversation going on the side, which is that tree equity is not about trees. It's about people. You say it again, tree equity is not about trees, it's about people. And it's about what trees can do for people. And this idea of employment, this idea of giving youth ecopreneurial opportunities, giving youth leadership opportunities, giving all community members a chance to be part of creating an incredible positive change in our communities is a central piece of this work. It's the right work. It has to be done the right way. And so we'll lean in together in follow-up conversation. We have a lot of tools around the workforce side of this, our Career Pathways Initiative we'd love to share with anyone who's interested. And again, thank you everyone so much for coming today and your robust participation. We really, really appreciate it.
If you want to dive deeper into nature access, head into the boardroom. I've got a report to release.
Thank you so much. Hey, thanks so much. I really appreciate you doing this. My gosh, it was wonderful.